Sean Marks gives no real insights around the Brooklyn Nets as we gear up for the playoff run right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo, indeed. It's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings. DraftKings, FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down New York Football Giants over on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. And we come in thanking you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. To Doug, set the table here for the final 23 games for the Brooklyn Nets season and gloss over the Sean Marks press conference, so to speak.
Well, I did myself dirty by having high hopes for that press conference. Like there was going to be some ground shifting announcement. I talked myself into that.
You were getting excited. You were having some
I talked
optimism.
myself into that. It was totally unfounded. I don't know what I was thinking. Like, I don't know what part of me, it was something I said in my head and then came to believe it as the day went on, having no evidence, by the way, mind you, not a single piece of evidence that like any major announcement was coming. It was a cool thing to do for the season ticket holders. It's a cool thing for them to do it. Do a little meet and greet. Marks is great. He, from what we could tell, he spent a lot of time talking to everybody afterwards too. A lot of shaking hands and answering questions, and it's really really cool. When it came to actual
shaking babies, I get it.
Basically, when it came to actual information about the Nets, there was almost nothing. I mean, we could probably take a few little pieces. I'll sum up the pieces that we have here that you get, and there was about a half hour, 40-minute talk with Michael Grady. From Yes. And basically the two pieces were no change on the vaccine mandate for Kyrie, hope that he's going to come back, but there was nothing that came from that. And then he did talk at length about Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons, mostly just in like sort of glowing terms, a lot about Durant. But there was something sort of thrown in around him having watched a practice for them and how they were getting up to sort of game speed. And then Grady asked, what the timeline for return is. And he said, I don't think I could say the next 3 or 4. And my heart stopped because I was waiting for him to say weeks. And I'm like, they don't have 3 to 4 weeks for these guys to come back. And he said 3 to 4 days. And he said, don't expect him in 3 to 4 days. But
right, for the Boston game, the Milwaukee game, etc.
Right. He didn't go any further than that. And I actually took that to be something of a positive, because that timeline could have been just something longer. Mm-hmm. And to say that as I don't think it's going to be in these next 3 to 4 days, like that means I think we could be within a week or two. And that is like something pretty critical that we're going to talk about for the Nets here. And I think that's the long and short of where we took now with 23 games left here for the team. That's, the state of the union from Marks was basically that. No news on Joe Harris. And that was kind of it. So, yeah, I mean, I those are the takeaways I took. I only felt marginally better than I felt going in. And I guess that's what we're going to talk about here.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Joe Harris there. That may have been the one piece that Nets fans were hoping just to hear something around. But again, because this felt like something to appease is the wrong way to frame it, but it's like, hey, I'm here. I want to show my face. I want to spend some time with the people that matter, the fans. We like that part of it. He talked about the culture and how it's an evolving process you go through as you're trying to build a championship team. But so you didn't get any real information. The concept around Kevin Durant's injury and the ramp up time for Simmons or for Dragic at that point as well. It seems like when we said the 15th, the Orlando game, like maybe sooner for Ben Simmons, certainly, but it feels like it's going to be a little bit further than closer. And I know that Nets fans have some trepidation around that, but I think you have to maintain a little bit of a steady as it goes. And the piece off of that as well is he did reference the trade, because Michael Graves was asking around the general chaos of what they went through here over the last, Grady said the last 4 months, which, makes it interesting because it does give some indication that injuries, obviously, mandate piece. But to me, Grady, who's around that organization, probably saying like, there's plenty to talk about here behind the scenes day to day. But when Sean Marks mentioned the trade, He specifically said that it makes Philadelphia better in the immediate, and we think that it made us better now and also for the future. And I think that's where you do start to couch this idea of, is this team going to make the playoffs? I still believe they're going to. We're going to get into that. Is this team going to be good? Yes, they are. But because you were forced to make a decision here at the trade deadline based on James Harden, the Nets and Sean Marks tried to be as calculated around, how do we do something that opens up our window further? We mentioned this before. And I think as small as that line was, I think that that's like the little breadcrumb you take away of the Nets think that they did something here that means we can keep ourselves in contention for 2, 3, 4 years going forward. Maybe not just this idea of check the championship box with the big three and then deal with the fallout later.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how we view this whole situation, is that it was ended up being a long game move in the end, and I think you kind of at this point have to just feel good about it. I think most Nets fans do. I think the organization does as well. So I don't think any of that was just lip service to the fans. I believe that
No.
they feel a little bit of like a breath of fresh air, even if this season has really gone as bad as humanly possible. Like at this point, starting from zero now, which is kind of sometimes what you just have to do, right? In a situation, you just say, hey, we're starting from zero and this is what we're going to do going forward. I think you have to feel good about the situation. Now, what it doesn't change, and this is what we wanted to talk about today, what it doesn't change is where the Nets do stand. And because we don't get to reset, even though they get to sort of reset their team a little bit, they do not get to reset the season.
Do they reset
And
the
the
records?
season,
Everyone starts with 0-0, right? That's what
I
we
wish.
nah. Ah,
Call Adam Silver.
thanks a
Nets have a
lot,
good case.
Adam.
Nets have a good case for it. So we want to talk about where the Nets stand here as they enter, because they don't let the All-Star break fool you. And I'm sure most people know this. Sometimes you get the All-Star break and you think, oh, this is halfway through the season. No, no, no. We're 72% of the way through the season. They have 23 games of 82 left. Like this season is mostly, three quarters of the way over, just about.
Mhm.
And like, just from a high level, we'll get into some of the specifics. Like, where do you stand on their ability to kind of right the ship here and get back into like championship contender mode? Or have you sort of written that off for the rest of the season? Because I think we're like this is the precipice right here where the range of outcomes for the Nets this season is as wide as probably any team in NBA history.
Yep.
Like they could miss the playoffs or they could win the title. And I don't think that there's very few teams you could have said that about in the past.
Well, what I think is I think they're going to accomplish the goal of getting all these guys on the court together. Now, whether it's for 10 games at the end of the year, right before you hit the playoff run, or it's 15, that could make a marginal difference for you. I don't think that from an organizational perspective, they believe if we're healthy and we have Kevin Durant, we don't fear any matchup going into the playoffs, right? We feel comfortable with any team that we're going to have to take on. Now, could they lose a series in the margins because they only have 10 or 15 games together? Sure, that's possible. But you've pointed out numerous times, right, that like talent overcomes this idea of continuity and getting on the same page. And they do have a lot of talented players and a lot of veteran players that they've brought in here now between the trade and then also picking up Dragic on the buyout market. So maybe it could be a little bit matchup dependent. Like some people have thrown out that idea of, well, what if you caught Miami in the first round? Well, that would be interesting, right? Because Miami's a very well coached team. But I think I could point to a lot of different matchups where I'd say we can get through that. I'm not worried about give me a 7-game series and this team will find a way to get through it. Am I still going to say they're not the odds on favorite to win the championship?
No,
But
they're not.
maybe it's because I'd already couched myself in this sense of I wasn't expecting Kevin Durant to come back right after the All-Star break. I wasn't expecting Ben Simmons to get traded for and walk out on the court. Like I had never set those expectations. So maybe if it's a little bit below where my bar was, I think it was still a lot more reasonable than where a lot of fans went. Justifiably, you make the trade, you're like, goodbye, James Harden, booyakasha. And all of a sudden you take the step back and go, still got a long way to go here. There's still a bit of a process. So I feel okay. Like I know we're going to get into the strength of schedule and stuff here in a minute, but I feel like they're still going to make the playoffs. I'm confident in that piece of it. What happens from there is certainly a TBD based on the sample size we get before you get to that point.
All right. Well, hopefully you can cheer me up a little bit because I might be a little bit more pessimistic than you are, though. That seems to be sometimes the theme of of how we roll on the show. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at Prize Picks. If you're looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA that's just as easy as it gets, you have to go check out Prize Picks. You can't go to some of these sites where you're trying to build salary stuff. You're up against sharks, a million lineups, all this other stuff. Prize Picks is just you versus the numbers. That's it. It's very easy. It's the best prop market on best prop operator on the market. You just pick 2 to 5 players. You go over under on the projections that Prize Picks has for you there. You can win up to 10x. That's 10 times on any entry. Like I said, just you versus those numbers. You can make entries in just 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks super safe and very fast withdrawals, which in that this industry is about as important as it gets. You can use the award-winning Prize Picks app through the App Store and Google Play. You go over there, you choose an NBA contest, you can points scored, rebounds, steals, assists. Like they have everything on their bench players too. It's not just the starters. So if you're really deep in the NBA weeds, you can really clean up here over in Prize Picks. You can also mix some sports up. Maybe you want to do a little NBA and a little NHL or MLB when it finally comes back. Prize Picks has that also. Right now, for a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. That's going to happen, folks. But you got to use the code NBA. That's right. Exclusive offer available for Locked On fans. Sign up today and use code NBA for $50 free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. Go check out Prize Picks.
And stop messing around. Go listen to Locked On now when you're done listening to our podcast. It's a wrap up from all the local experts, insights around the entire NBA. Get some tips and insight for these teams that we may have to work through in order to secure this playoff spot for the Brooklyn Nets. Speaking of that, strength of schedule and obviously the path here with where the Nets currently stand in the playoff picture. And we know, at least in the short term, very difficult set of games here. And then really overall, they had easier stretches in the year already. This represents a relatively difficult stretch. And even though they're listed over on Tankathon, it has them 13th in strength of schedule. And it's, percentage points in there with Philadelphia, Houston, Boston, all the way up to that 10th spot there. But when you see teams listed among them for Brooklyn, like the Grizzlies twice against the Heat, the Jazz, the Sixers, the Cavs, the Bucks, and then even a couple other back end, the easy teams are easy, but that big grouping there, is that ranking accurate to the actual schedule they're going to be playing? Because it's not necessarily just where the teams stand overall. It's how they've been surging perhaps over the last 15, 20 games.
Yeah, so Hackathon is going to rank remaining strength of schedule by the teams that you are playing and their overall record, right? Like the teams that you have left in your schedule, what their win percentage is. They just figure this out, and then they spit out the number, and the Nets at 13th. So around middle of the pack, a little harder than average. But the problem is that when you look at this, I would contend that this number is inaccurate based on current context around some of the teams that they have to play, especially early, because they are catching some of these teams at the exact wrong time based on what their season record is. Case in point, the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics,
not listed among the toughest matchups that I just listed there. They're not listed in that group based on
and
what
they might be.
Right.
And they might be. Here's a couple sneaky things about the Celtics who they need to play twice in relatively short order here. They have to play them twice in the first 6 games back from the break. Boston has the best point differential in the East. Okay. Yes, they sit 6th, but their point differential is the best. They are about to climb into the number 1 ranking on defense for the season. They're going to probably in the next couple games leapfrog Golden State to be the best defense, just because of where Golden State's is more about Golden State going the wrong direction than them going the right direction. But still, they're an absolutely elite defense. Like their record is actually like their implied record is much better than what Tankathon's going to give you. So already creep Brooklyn up the list a little bit on how difficult their remaining schedule is, right? Maybe tick them up 2 spots. I'm kind of making that up. Another team that's like this is Toronto. Toronto has also underperformed their record in terms of their Pythagorean win percentage. Like they're 32 and 25. They have a plus 1.8 point differential, and they're actually another team that's getting like fully healthy ish now too, where they weren't all season. So their record, they're 8-2 over their last 10. Tick them up as being a little harder than probably the record indicates. And you can sort of see where I'm going. That's 4 of their first 6 games back from the break. So I would say that their strength of schedule here Miami getting a little healthier too. I know Hero's out, but their starters are starting to round back into what they thought they were going to be.
Mhm.
And then you look at Philadelphia. I mean, is Philadelphia a better team now? They have James Harden, right? Who will presumably be back for that team by the time they have to play Philadelphia. I'd call them a better team with James Harden than without James Harden, even with the players they lost. So you can kind of see where I'm going. I think that the real number for the Nets and the remaining strength of schedule is probably like in the top 10 most difficult.
Mhm.
And that is bad news for a team that is basically a brand new team.
Yep.
Like, this is the other thing we're sort of underselling around the Nets. Well, let's start there. We'll go back to the new team here in a second. When I give you that sort of like diagnosis on the teams that they have to play coming up here in pretty short order,
Mhm.
like, does that like worry you at all? Because I would say when I look at the strength schedule, I'm like, ooh, middle of the pack. But when I really looked at it, I'm like, no, it's actually much harder than that.
Yeah, I still don't care. Not to say that because again, you mentioned those two teams, Boston and Toronto are a combined 17-3 over their last 20 games, 10 apiece, 9-1 and 8-2. So they're obviously surging. The Brooklyn Nets are 2-8 over their last 10. But and this is what we did when we first talked about projecting the win totals, and I did all the percentages around teams behind them, etc. And then things got even worse for the Brooklyn Nets with Harden and everything
Yeah,
else.
you did
But
all that, and I was right. Like,
well, okay, to be fair,
I'm busting
I
your
did, I
chops.
know, and you were, but it was like I did all that work, and then it was like, but what if we do? What if we do three more things that make it harder for the Nets? And I was like, well, that
Yeah.
doesn't help me at all. But it still stands. So 23 games, right? There's two parts to this. First, when you look at the Brooklyn Nets schedule, and you talk about how difficult it is here with Boston, Milwaukee, double against Toronto. You throw in Miami there, Boston again, the 76ers after the Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte Hornets, keep that team in mind. The back end of their schedule here down the stretch of the season, they're going to get after the 76ers on March 10th, which maybe Simmons will be there for, maybe Kevin Durant. But they have Orlando, Portland, they have Charlotte again, Detroit, they have the Hawks mixed in there, who are definitely a better performing team now than they had been, Houston, New York, and then the Pacers to close out the season. All of this to say, even over these 23 games with a relatively difficult road ahead, if I still set that benchmark of the 15th of March, Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, Dragic, everybody's out there on the court. The Nets need to find their way to say, let's not find their way, but say they go 10-13 over their final 23 games. All I care about is whether or not, when I look at the standings, do I think the Charlotte Hornets, who currently stand 2.5 games behind the Brooklyn Nets in the standings, that's for the 9th spot, and then you have the Hawks, are they going to overtake Brooklyn over the remainder of their schedule? And by the way, Charlotte has what's listed as the 20th most difficult schedule, but inside of that, they're going to get the Heat, the Bulls, the Jazz, the 76ers, the Cavs, and the Bucks mixed in there to go along with another slew of crappy teams like the Pistons and the Magic, etc. But the Charlotte Hornets, who are 1-9 in their last 10 games, they need to surge here. And by the way, because my only goal is for the Brooklyn Nets to be in it, and that includes being in the 10th seed and in the play-in game. Like, that's the agenda here. Get to that place. So I still feel comfortable saying, and maybe 10-13 is a lofty record to set depending on how things go here. But I can, by the way, I know I don't want to be rambling on this here, but just quickly, when you talk about that schedule, I'm going to walk it in reverse from the final game of the season against the Pacers. Pacers, Knicks, Rockets, Pistons, Charlotte, the Portland Trailblazers, the Magic, the Knicks, Charlotte again. I've gotten you to 10 games. Those are 10 games. Win those 10 games, lose every other one against every team that's ahead of you in the standings. I've heard fans say, how can we try to find a way to work our way up to the 6th seed? It doesn't effing matter. Win those 10 games against crappy teams that you should be able to beat, even if you don't have everybody healthy for all 23 of these, which you're not going to, and you're in the play-in game and you take it from there. If you're 100% healthy in that play-in game, I am willing to put a significant bet on the idea that they win the play-in game, they win the second play-in game, and they find themselves in a first-round playoff series with whoever's in the number one spot at that point.
Yeah, and real quick, just in case you don't know the mechanics of the playing game and why, like this, the difference between 7, 8, 9, and 10 matters. Basically, 7 and 8 play each other. Whoever wins that one's in the playoffs, right?
Yep.
That's the first thing. So you want to be right to start. You'd like to be in that 7 and 8 spot because it's just one and done. You're in the playoffs. If you're 9 and 10, you play each other, and then you play the loser of the 7-8 game. So 9 and 10 got to win twice on the way out, right? So like that's why even just holding on to the 8th seed. This is why the percentages really start dropping when you get to that 9th spot. It's not because it's like so much lower. It's just like every other game you have to win in a one and done situation just decreases your odds by, well, not by 50%, but like it takes off, it lops off a certain amount of playoff expectation. So I think that we have to really be rooting for, still, we want to, if we're rooting for anything, yes, be in it to have a chance. If we had to root for another thing here, it's like root to be in the eighth, at least in the eighth seed, because you can at least play that one game, right? And beat one of these other teams that maybe got there with you.
Of course. I'm going to keep this going on the other side of it real quick. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online, because football is over. Obviously, that's not a big deal. From the latest odds, totals, player performance props, and where the next fired coach is going to be. That's upsetting. I don't know why they want to drill that point home. You can get over, though, to betonline.net, where it's the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. Bet Online remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news around the season. And it's not just basketball, by the way. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right down to your Olympic coverage. It wrapped up, but it sure was fun. There's a lot of medals, hardware, my friends. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device and learn more about the trends and action. Bet Online, it's where the game starts. The last quick footnote here is just, I just want to quickly say, even in that play-in scenario, by the way, as it currently stands, if you said the Nets fall down and Charlotte loses to the Toronto Raptors, and then the Nets have to beat the Hawks, let's say, to then play the loser, the Charlotte Hornets, I still like their chances. That's all I'm going to say. I'm an optimistic guy while giving you a ton of realistic expectations. Now, the other reason why people may question why I'm so optimistic and confident is because we have to take a look at this roster. And we know that they brought in a lot of talented players, but I thought it'd be a good exercise to now. You add Seth Curry, you add Drummond, you bring in Dragic here, and in some ways, you're going to also add Ben Simmons. You're going to also add Kevin Durant here. When we look at this roster, let's reverse engineer it from the bottom up, because the other day we talked about the close call of Nicholas Claxton maybe being traded ahead of the deadline. He's still on the roster. It seems like the general sense is he's going to be buried. What other players are automatically buried right now with the addition of everyone else that came in? Let's just start with the bigs. Claxton looks like he's buried for right now. Is Day'Ron Sharpe, the rookie, automatically done getting minutes in the near future?
Yeah, he's done. Yeah, he's
Okay.
done. I think I would be shocked if he played another minute here outside of like a massive blowout or injuries. Like I think it's pretty much over for him. Claxton, it's sure looking like it's over. And we can keep walking up, but
Sure.
I would say Claxton, I mean, there's a chance. There's a world where like that sort of set of skills that he has, they want to sort of, foster before the playoffs. It's now been 2 years where that does not seem to be something they want to do. So like I don't think that's going to be the case, but stranger things, I guess.
So that being the case, then one of the other footnotes that I thought about ahead of the trade deadline, when they talked about James Johnson, Steve Nash kept mentioning his ability to put the ball on the court, to be able to create a shot, a little bit on the dribble, this pseudo little bit of point guard kind of role. He could bring the ball up the court for you. Now that you've added in all these other pieces, let's James Johnson and Blake Griffin. Is one of them ahead of the other in terms of having a role here, or either one of them automatically diminished? Because in my mind, to me, James John, I don't know. Maybe the staff likes him better and his role is more defined. I still look at it and say Blake Griffin is the guy that is the grit dude. He's the guy that takes the charges and gives you this, whatever, 12-minute sample size a game where he can do some of the little physical things for you.
You're talking about we're talking about if they're fully healthy at this point, like everyone's back
Yes.
and playing. Yeah, sorry. I should have I should have clarified that. I would still say they're pretty far near the end of the bench here, situationally only. Drummond just causes such a problem for Blake specifically. Like the Drummond plus, if assuming they want to play him, which it seems like they do, the Drummond plus Aldridge piece. We saw a little bit of Blake and Aldridge playing together. Or was it Blake and Drummond? We saw Blake playing with another big a little bit, and it wasn't a total disaster, but it's not something you're going to want to do. I think these guys are pretty low down. I think you can see James Johnson every once in a while for very specific matchups, a la like the Julius Randle game, where it was like clear they were going to stick him on Randle. Maybe you think one of these guys is a Giannis stopper. You know what I mean? Like in a situation where they feel like they need to get just like a thicker body in against Giannis. I think you could see a Blake, kind of show up for position, something like that. After that, in terms of like hardcore rotation, when they're healthy, I think these guys are pretty far down there too.
And it's funny too, when we talk about Ben Simmons, we know he's a point guard, but with his size, he does eat into, I think, some of these big minutes, depending on what type of roster you want to run. And we've talked about maybe wanting to go more shooting heavy and surrounding Ben Simmons, Kyrie, and Kevin Durant with just a lot of firepower. Has Bruce Brown reestablished himself inside of this rotation and having a role with some more sound performances, looking like he is back into the role that he was filling so well last year and seemed to just fall out of in some disjointed roster rotations over the course of the year?
It's interesting. He probably isn't done. He's done a little bit to play himself back into it. He's actually helped a little bit more by who the Nets have gotten rid of in
Yeah.
trimming the roster, because losing Bembry and cutting Javon Carter, who neither one was like necessarily lighting the world on fire. Those guys were like a little bit more in the vein of what Bruce Brown does. I mean, Bembry more than Bruce Brown, but I mean,
Both
more Bembry
defensive
more than
minded.
Javon Carter. But like, point of attack defender made its rounds on Twitter the other day, which is hilarious to see. But like, he still is kind of one of their only guys that can kind of do that now still, besides probably Simmons. So there's still probably a role for Bruce Brown. Do you want to hear funny? Bruce Brown on the current Nets roster, Bruce Brown's played the third most minutes on the season for this team. Didn't that blow your mind? Like, I couldn't believe that when I read it. Like, it's number one's Mills by like an absolute country mile. They
Sure.
traded hard. They traded Harden. Durant is still somehow second on the team, on the
That's
current
right.
team, even though he's missed the last 17 games. Like, he's still second overall in minutes. And then Bruce Brown is third. It's really more of a testament to like how wacky this whole season has been with the roster moves and just like who's been able to play and who hasn't. How many guesses would it have taken to get to Bruce Brown as being like the current third most minutes guy on the team? There's no way we
There's
get
no
there.
way.
Anyway, so we can keep going, but yeah.
No, so no, it really is fascinating. So, and I think that you're right, and I like that too. By the way, this is I think the reward for however they came to this place. This guy had a role for you. You saw the upside, the talent, the skill. I know that people liked Bembry. I know that people hated Carter. But all throughout that thread, as the minute share tells you, Bruce Brown was clearly a guy the staff believed in, because in 33 different starting lineups, Bruce Brown still found his way to a significant minute share. Then we get into this guy feels like a player unto himself. Kessler Edwards. Is he no longer the mechanism of 3-and-D, gives you some defensive upside? It seems like you said it last episode, the Nets are leaning more into the offensive side. Now we know Ben Simmons is a defender, but maybe it does Ben Simmons' presence effectively afford you the ability to say, we don't need to look for this rookie to still be as effective or as functional as we maybe thought we could have been leaning towards at one point along the way.
Yeah, so I think with him, I think you're probably looking at a situation where his two skill sets have now probably been taken out of play by two or three different guys.
Yeah.
So it's like Simmons adds a little more like wing rangy defense, and then guys like Curry and maybe Dragic or more minutes out of and Kyrie just adds more shooting. And at that point, I think we're starting to see the writing on the wall with Kessler. We've already seen it. Like, he didn't start the last couple games. Excuse me, he didn't. He got a spot start. He didn't start the next game, but then he got the spot start. But it was only because James Johnson had like a late scratch, right? Like Johnson was gonna start. And by the way, I'll throw in Cam Thomas here too. I think we're gonna start. I know fans have fallen in love with Cam Thomas. It's been rightfully so. He's been a really great story. He can do. I think he's going to have a career here. I think that's pretty clear. Like, anyone that can come in and score like this and has his head on straight, which he clearly does, like, has a career in the league. I would not be shocked if as this team gets healthy, this is another guy that we start to see almost none of. And because it's just not going to make sense. Like, they're not going to need it. Like, once they get healthier around some of the guys that can score, when that's really the only thing he can do right now, I think, and he can do it really well. It's just that they just don't need that kind of guy as much. So I think I'll throw Cam in with Kessler and say, as we get a few more games in here, we're going to start seeing many fewer minutes from these guys. And if the vaccine mandate gets lifted, we're going to see almost none of them. Because I'm mostly putting in Kyrie as like saying that Kyrie plus Dragic will be the end of like a guy like a Cam for the most part.
So then let's put that pause there and then just dial it now, talking about basically the starting unit, right? It's going to be Simmons, Kyrie, Seth Curry. I'm not saying who's starting or not or what have you. Kevin Durant and Drummond. You put Aldridge, you put Patty Mills. You're going to put Dragic will be in there in the mix there too. That's 8, and then you're talking about Bruce Brown makes 9. Like, Bruce Brown is 9, and then you're getting to Blake Griffin, James Johnson, and some of these spots at 10. Is that's it, right? Is that do you think that would be that essential? And this isn't, I'm not, holding your feet to the fire on it, but that's going to be what Steve Nash and they try to push towards. Here's 10 guys that every game along the way that we get healthier, we'd like to see these guys play together. Again, the sample size before the playoffs, right?
And this is the whole dream, and we could probably kind of start wrapping up on this. This is the dream, because you just have to tread water enough to get that group having played 10 games together.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, that group. Now, 10 games, you mentioned at the top of the podcast, and I'll go back to it now. You said something about how in the end talent wins, right? Like, in the end, your aggregate talent is usually going to be the story. I believe that is true up until a point. there comes a point when you are going for championships where you do need something more, because once you're at the very top of the mountain, almost everyone's aggregate talent is really, really good.
Mhm.
And at that point, you do need other things like rapport, consistency, like a good understanding of what everyone's roles are, like personality things that match up with each other. Like there's lots of other things at that point that you need to check, like clear hierarchies of who's supposed to do what. Um, and so I think like regular season wise, like a good group of players will just win a lot of games just by default. I do think when it's coming for absolute championship time, it will hurt the Nets that we're talking about an 8-man group that's like never stepped on the court together. Like we're
Well,
23 games. The guys you just mentioned have never played together. And like at some point you just don't, I don't think you don't have enough time to make that up. And Kevin Durant's like the one wild card that says like maybe he's good enough to like make up for a lot of it. But anyway, that's like my sort of final thought on that.
and there's a difference between Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving versus Kevin Durant, Kyrie, and these other players. But I think you're right. By the way, I was quoting you about that. That wasn't even my own thought around talent overcomes continuity. But and I agree with you. I think that's why, and we mentioned this last episode, when you bring in a guy like Dragic, we know how close he has connections to Steve Nash. So you feel like that execution level works to your benefit. Something we haven't touched on yet that we will as we work towards Ben Simmons getting onto the court. He has connections with Patty Mills to the Australian national team. So you feel like there's some continuity and understanding there. We know that Patty Mills played with LaMarcus Aldridge going back to his time with the Spurs. Like, and Drummond obviously has ties with Simmons and with Seth Curry. So like, it's interesting that you have kind of like these little cliques underneath the umbrella that is the Brooklyn Nets, and hopefully they can function together, because we did see, even with Kyrie, James, Harden, and Kevin Durant, it was like the turnover piece, right? I thought you were going left and you went right. I thought you were going to
Yeah.
pull outside the arc and you cut towards the basket. That's okay. It's a little clunky, whatever. But those are the kind of another Doug Norrieism in the margins where you can lose a playoff game because you had 2 or 3 more turnovers just predicated on the lack of familiarity. So that's something that they need to refine. And hopefully these little pockets where these guys do know one another can help spread throughout the team and say, this is what Curry likes. Hey, I'm Patty Mills. I can tell you what Ben Simmons is best at. Even if it's not with him in the group, I can tell Kevin Durant, here's what you're going to want to do with Ben, right? And hopefully that helps it work. But it's obviously the question mark. There's no guarantees here for Brooklyn. I'm hoping that talent gets you to the playoffs and enough continuity develops along the way.
All right, yeah, I feel better now. I just got to
Of
get
course
to
you
that. Let's get to that. Let's get to that 8th seed, and we're gonna be okay. Okay, tomorrow's episode is a good one. It's a roundtable between myself and the guys from the Celtics, Hawks, Raptors, and Hornets as we talked about the play-in game possibilities among all these teams. I was just a complete shock that I was even there to have to talk about the Nets in this category, and that was kind of the theme of the show.
Walked in the wrong room, guys. Walked in the wrong room.
It's a really good listen because it kind of gives you where these other teams are seeing themselves by the guys that are just in the weeds covering them as well. So that will be that. And then I'll be back again on Friday doing a full game breakdown after this first game back from the All-Star break. Make sure you go check out the YouTube channel, doing great numbers. Again, so appreciative of everyone over there. Shout out to the Aussie bump. Someone thought that we might have gotten an Australian bump on the thing. And if that's the case, I'm here for it, mate. That's an Australian reference. So
rolled off the tongue so well.
So go and like and subscribe over to Locked On Nets YouTube channel.
Do love it. Let's just frame it like this, my friends. Got a lot of work to do. 23 games left. Great things come from hard work and perseverance. No excuses. If you love a thing, you will overcome all difficulties. Kobe Bryant.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.